Eric Kiniti is the Group Corporate Relations Director at EABL. He's our guest now. I invite him the way we invite our guests, as taught by CT, with the day's proverb. The proverb is from Malawi. If you're going to bathe, get thoroughly wet. If you're going to bathe, get thoroughly wet. Eric, good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you for having me.
That's a hot seat of the situation. How does it feel? Comfortable?
Yeah, it's very comfortable.
Very good. This proverb is from Malawi. What's your interpretation of it? If you're going to bathe, get thoroughly wet.
The way I understand it, or how I would interpret it is, if you're going to do something, you better do it very well.
That's on the days you were saying, go for the tens, go for the hundreds.
Spot on.
Yeah.
If you're going to do something, give it your all. Get thoroughly wet.
That is an African proverb against French baths, sponge baths. Good bath.
Passports.
Those
Get-
passports.
Get wet.
Completely. Uingia kwa mtu ingia. All the way in. So, Eric, we want to have a conversation about excise stamps. And it's a conversation that every year when there's budget, one of the things that we look at is, all right, syntax. And then we look at, so we are going to pay a bit more. I mean, the government is going to collect a bit more revenue through this luxury items. And alcohol is considered one of those luxury items. And EABL is primarily in the business of alcohol, right?
Yes.
Now, there's a lot to understand, but let's just first of all begin by understanding the nature of business that the alcoholic drinks business is. Tell us in numbers the consumption trends, the business case for it, and how much you've been paying to the tax collector in taxes.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'll probably start with the performance. And being a listed company, I think you must have seen us release our results about 2 weeks back. And one of the things that we noticed from our half-year results is that the consumption of beer dropped by 13%. Spirits dropped by 1%, which obviously is not a good trend for us. And I must say that our industry has been suffering from the effects of COVID. If you remember, during COVID, the restrictions forced us to close because some of the bars in most of the major cities were closed. There were restrictions in terms of hours of opening as well. So we have really been suffering the last 3 years since COVID, and we've not fully recovered. Coupled with that, we've had excise increases every year, and in the last 14 months, we've actually had 3 excise increases.
In the last 14 months?
14 months. That's from October 2021 to October 2022, which has impacted us in a very big way. So beer, for example, we've had about 23% increase on excise, and spirits about 34% increase on excise. So if you look at that, and those excise increases are always passed on to the consumer. This is a consumer who is also suffering from the macroeconomic effects of inflation. So affordability has become a real challenge, and we're seeing that with our consumers who are moving to illicit. So we think that the government is shooting themselves in the foot by constantly increasing taxes, and now this new increase, proposed increase on excise stamps, is just going to make that situation even worse. So what we ask the government to do is to take a look back and say, look, we want the industry to grow, because for the industry to grow, the revenues are going to grow. In terms of tax payments to government, they're also not improving. So whereas they're increasing aggressively the tax rates, the revenues are not going up. And you've seen that being flat since 2015. So for beer, for example, and we're the biggest player in beer, we have been paying between 20 and 21 billion shillings per year.
And this is on excise alone?
On excise alone. So with volumes going down, you'd expect that government is also hurting. So one of the things we're asking government is, you need to sit back and think about the tax policy on alcohol specifically, because if you don't do that, you're not going to grow the sector. And the other multiplier effect about our industry is that we have farmers. And I must say, we are very proud that we are the only company that actually sources local grain, barley and sorghum. And if our volumes are going down, it means also our demand for the grain is going down. So our farmers are not getting any additional income from that. We have been forced in the last 12 months to increase our prices, both on barley and sorghum. Barley by about 20%, sorghum by about 36%. This is because we also want to cushion that farmer, because their inputs have gone up. So if you continue paying them the same amount we were paying them 2 years ago, obviously they don't make any money and will not be able to source. So we've also seen an increase in our inflation on costs and inputs, and we're also suffering like any other industry, because drought is also forcing us to try and get into more areas, because we cannot get the same yields that we were getting previously. So I think it's an opportunity for us to sit with government and take a look back and say, how do we grow together? Because it has to be mutual.
Sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the government is shooting itself in the foot by increasing these taxes, increasing this excise. How? How exactly?
So, like I've explained, the consumer is already suffering. So the minute you take excise into levels where the consumer cannot be able to afford legitimate product, they are going to go for illicits. These illicits don't pay tax at all. So you're not benefiting at all. So, and like I've said, in the last 5 years, you've seen excise collections from beer specifically being flat. So whereas we have seen annual increases based on inflation, then I've told you about the last 2 years, we've seen excise going up by 24% on beer and 34% on spirits. The volumes are also declining. So whereas you'd expect, government is expecting an increase. And you know, the logic here is our products are inelastic, so they will never suffer because consumers will continue consuming. But the truth is, the consumer is consuming cheaper or illicit products. They are moving off from the formal sector to the informal sector, which government has no control over. So, and that's the point I was making about shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah. Eric, were you expecting, did this come as a surprise, the intention to increase the excise stamp
Yes.
Duty? Because I suppose you were anticipating, because it was in the news that it was probably going to be halved, actually.
Yeah.
What is the worst case scenario given this surprise for you as a company?
So the worst case scenario would be to keep the rates as they are. But the best case scenario, because the information we have and the arrangement that KRA has with the current supplier, was that because now the system is being handed over to KRA fully, and it's been fully paid for by taxpayers, by the way, we would expect the cost to go down. First of all, if you look at the scale of the products in Kenya that are under this regime, it's quite massive. So you'd expect, because of the economies of scale, then the cost should be going down. The other thing you look at is that across East Africa, we have the same supplier providing the same solution to other governments in East Africa. It's only Kenya where you find the band of products is quite huge. But the cost in those other countries, Uganda and Tanzania, is actually even lower than what we have currently. So you'd expect that because we have been on it for 7 years, the cost should be going down. The other thing to look at is, for example, on beer, we don't even have a paper stamp. It's actually a laser inkjet that is printed on the bottle top. What cost is going up?
Yeah.
It's ink. Why is it going up double? So they have not really explained to us how they have come up with this cost, so the justification of this cost. Because we deal with paper. We put labels on bottles. We know the cost of paper globally, how the prices have gone up. It cannot be double. So again, we are saying justify it to us, because you're business people. Make us see the logic, and we probably work with you. But right now, it's not clear.
So there's on the Business Daily on Monday, this past Monday, there's a story that says that the explanation behind this could be a 4.5 billion debt owed to the Swiss contractor by the KRA. And this debt, the repayment of this debt, is now what is being cascaded down to you as manufacturers and then eventually to us as consumers. Is this the case? Is this...
It's actually quite a weird explanation, because you got into a contract and agreed on a price. How the debt arises then is mysterious to us as players.
It's actually, in fact, reading this article, you would think that it is an inadvertent admission, because that is not something that a government would say, that it's this debt that we got into and and now you're paying for it. But also what I was asking in my previous question is, what is the worst case scenario for you as a company? Not in terms of what is the worst case scenario that it is increased. What is the worst case scenario in terms of the effect of the increase
So
down the road?
yeah. So currently we are spending about 1 billion shillings on these tax stamps per year. So when you look at the cost that is now being proposed, it's going to double. So we are saying we are going to have to pay an additional 1 billion shillings.
Yeah.
Obviously, we cannot absorb that cost. We'd have to pass it on to the consumer. And the impact to the consumer, we're talking about between 5 and 10 shillings per bottle. Because this is a cost that, first of all, you have to pay VAT on that cost. It's not deductible. So you have to pass that cost on to the consumer. So we are saying that last year we took prices up in July. We took prices in October. We have to take prices again now.
So you're increasingly looking at a
Yeah.
consumer who is likely to not be able to afford your product at all
Yes.
very soon.
Very soon. And the big issue here is that we are saying about illicit in Kenya is about 50%. So you're just going to make a bad situation even worse. Yeah.
Explain this illicit.
So illicit comes in probably 3 different forms, the way I'd call it. So there is your local brew, which is your changa, busa, moratina, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you have product which is disguised as genuine and formal. It's in a bottle. It has a label. It has a KEBS mark.
Counterfeit.
But I'm not even talking about counterfeit yet. But it's not paying duty. So you call it a duty not paid product. You as a consumer will not know, because when you find it on the shelf and it's being offered at a price, you'll buy. So you find that a lot of these products, actually, especially in the spirits category, where products being sold between 100 and 150 shillings per the 250 ml. If you look at some of these products, the tax on that product alone is about 80 shillings. So you cannot tell me how someone is making money
When you're selling it at 100 bob.
at 100 bob. So there's something funny you're doing. So that's the second issue of illicit. The third one is counterfeit, where you find a lot of the fast-moving brands. There are a lot of local people manufacturing, correcting bottles and packaging them and selling them as genuine, but they are basically counterfeit and an infringement of the IP rights of the.
So
of the
somebody
brand
takes
owner.
somebody else's bottle
Yes.
and then they put their own
Yes,
concoction
yes,
or whatever
yes.
and they sell it off us,
Yes.
that
At
brand.
the same price.
Yes.
At the same price
yeah.
as the original brand.
Yes. So they are riding on your marketing because you've probably done a lot of marketing of the brand, but
Yep.
the consumer will never know. Yeah.
This duty not paid,
Yeah.
how does it thrive in a heavily regulated industry and government and, well, countries such as ours?
And maybe that's the problem. You're so regulated that the incentive to do these funny things is quite high. And it starts from the raw material, ethanol. So a lot of ethanol comes from southern Africa. So whether it's Tanzania, whether it's South Africa, all the way down,
Yeah.
because it's a byproduct of the sugar industry. So a lot of this is smuggled in. And why the incentive is high is because duty on ethanol is also 100%. So if I buy ethanol from Tanzania, let's say for 1 million shillings, the duty will be double.
$1 billion.
It's 1 million.
$1 million.
So if I evade duty in the raw material, I've already halved my costs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I make a product which will not be reported or recorded by KRA because I'm doing it either behind my house or even if it's in a plant, it's not recorded. And that's where the challenges that come with that duty not paid, because it's going to be sold in the market, and it's evident. If you go to most urban centers, wine and spirit shops, they'll tell you we have number 1 and number 2. Number 1 is a genuine product, and the other issue is that these stamps are heavily counterfeited. So you find a product has a tax stamp, but that tax stamp is not genuine. And the only person who can tell you whether it's genuine or not is KRA.
Yeah.
They don't have enough people in every wine and spirit shop to tell you whether it's genuine or not.
But for you to be able, I mean, we see in terms of the first category, you talked about the illicit brew, the local brews.
Yeah.
We see chiefs and headmen doing the local raids all the time. And those people who are brewing changa and busa in their backyards are being arrested regularly. We don't see very many raids into these places where they're distilling ethanol and putting it in properly packaged bottles and even counterfeiting the stamps and taking them to the market. I mean, that's a properly organized structure where there's manufacturing, there's distribution, an entire distribution network, and then it ends up in the same bar.
Yeah, it's organized crime, and obviously it involves a lot of players in enforcement. And the major issue we have in Kenya actually is enforcement, because the truck, by the time it leaves the border in Namanga and comes all the way, it's being escorted. It passes so many roadblocks. But again, they're also quite ingenious. Some of these guys, you find the truck with ethanol probably is also they've put onions or other things, so it's disguised in many ways. But I think there is a way that government, if they put resources behind that enforcement, that they'd be able to net some of these guys.
So the counterfeit people have a budget for protection, while the poor guys making illicit brew do not,
have.
and so so they're vulnerable to enforcement.
Yeah.
And the other end of the spectrum, the genuine guys who are making genuine product, who are publicly listed, are being slapped with a 23% increase.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
in
really
tax.
no incentive for an upcoming future industrialist or a manufacturer, a Kenyan one, because you're slapped, as Eric is saying, from every direction. You have power costs that are high, you have inflation, you have forex shortage and that kind of thing. And then on top of it, excise stamps and duties. I saw it. I think it was last month when the president had a meeting with the Manufacturers Association, and they were talking about increasing manufacturers' contribution to the GDP from, I think right now it's about 7%,
to 20%.
to 20%.
Yeah.
But all these things are working at cross purposes with that intention.
Definitely.
It's not something that we're going to realize.
Yeah. And you probably, and I'll give you an example, and to just paint a picture of how stringent or we are discouraged as investors in this country. So I'll give you, a bottle of Tusker, for example, the recommended retail selling price is 190.
Yeah.
A similar product in Uganda and Tanzania is probably selling at 100. So if you go
The equivalent of 100.
equivalent of 100 shillings. If you go to most of our border towns, people would rather cross over
For
to
a
the
beer.
other and drink a beer
Yeah.
on the other side and walk back. And just to enumerate to you how skewed this is. So out of that 107 shillings is actually tax. Excise, VAT, and what we pay as corporation tax.
Out of what now?
Out of the
190.
90
Out of the 190.
Yes.
in the
Okay.
Tusker.
107 is government. Yeah. So we have another 25 shillings, which is the trade margins we give to our distributors and to the retail. Then we are left with 57 shillings. This 57 shillings is what KBL is going to pay the farmer for the grain.
Your employees?
Our employees, my salary comes out of that. Our distribution, because remember we distribute all the products to all our distributors across the country. All our overhead costs, all our selling and advertising expenses, the dividends we are paying to the shareholders, and any financing costs that we have borrowed from the banks. So the biggest shareholder in our business is actually
Is the government.
Wow.
They should actually be sitting in our strategy sessions and asking us, how do we grow your business?
Right.
And now, given this 57 shillings that you're splitting, how many employees do you have?
So we have about 1,200 employees direct, but then we have
The
others
distributors.
through.
Yeah.
So distributors are not directly under us, so they're not our employees, but
But they make money.
yeah, so we have
Yeah.
to give them the margin because they have to be able to distribute us.
So that's what is actually jeopardized, and that's why I was asking about the worst case scenario is if we can no longer afford your beer or your products,
Yeah.
then you start going down that route.
Of course, yeah, because if you look at even the impact of cost inflation on our sector, on labels, glass, the packaging material that we use, it's gone up quite significantly. And we have to think really hard about how to cut costs in our business. So a lot of that work on productivity, because we don't want people to lose jobs. We actually made a conscious decision during COVID not to let anyone go, despite the fact that our production was half, even sometimes in the earlier stages, it was even, there are days we could go, we were producing only 2 days a week, but we never let anyone go. So we've really suffered and struggled. And it's not just our industry, but the hospitality industry at large. And you see progressive economies. I was just reading something about 2 weeks ago, Dubai removed all taxes on alcohol. They removed all licensing on alcohol. And you think they would be more stringent. But because they want to attract tourism, they realize that's actually a hook. Because they want to promote tourism, they want people to come in and be able to afford alcohol. So the UK, they have not increased taxes in the last 2 years because they realized the impact of COVID on these industries was quite significant. Tanzania, for 5 years, they have never touched their taxes. And you can see the taxes are growing every year. Uganda, the last 4 years. So I think there's a big conversation need to be had about the tax policy in Kenya, and not only on our industry. If you look across, and I'm sure, and you're seeing a lot of people complaining about high taxation, and I think that's what government needs to sit with industry and the private businesses and say, what is the most optimal way to tax our citizens so that the economy can grow.
Sure, of course, with the understanding that government's job is to create a conducive environment within which, its people can thrive and businesses can also flourish. Now, sitting in the industry, what would be the suggestion? I mean, you've given examples of other countries. How would it be? Because you've practiced in an environment, obviously, that is not conducive. So what are the suggestions for then creating that environment then, which is all within reason, of course?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, on excise, I think we have the inflation adjustment is not working. And that's the trend we have been seeing in the last 5 years. We actually started losing out in 2015 when we increased beer by 43% in 1 year. So since then, we've just seen the trend of tax revenue being poor. So volumes are going down, and then the tax revenues have been flat. So these excise increases every year are not working. So we are proposing already during these budget proposals that they should hold taxes on beer at least for the next 3 years, because we believe that the volume will start coming back, and the revenues will also come through with that. So I think that is the best thing. On this tax stamps issue, we think that first of all they need to do an impact study. You've had this system in place for the last 7 years. What are the benefits? Is it helping deal with the issue you are trying to deal with, which was revenue leakage? From where I sit, I don't think it has. So why would you want to impose additional cost to businesses that is not getting you the objective that you wanted to achieve in the first place? So those are, I think, broadly speaking, those are the two things that we'll be looking at. Yeah.
Time for us to take that break. It's 8:30. This is Kenya's biggest conversation, The Situation Room. Eric Kiniti is our guest. Eric is the Group Corporate Relations Director at EABL. We are talking about excise stamp that the government is even considering raising again. In the last, between October 2021 and October 2022, it was increased 3 times. There's talk that, in order to increase our tax revenues, one of the ways that the government is looking at the same industry and saying, how about some more excise tax from these guys? And that's what they're going for. And Eric is here to say, come on, people, let's think again about this. All right? Before we go there, can we just review what's been happening so far and the impact of that, not just to the industry, to your own revenues, to our industry, to the Kenyan consumer, and where that is taking the Kenyan consumer to the illicits, which are going to be more poisonous.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Conversation continues. Daisy Maritim Minor is our guest host today, and Eric Kiniti is a Group Corporate Relations Director at EABL. Our guest for this hour, we are talking about excise stamp and the impact that this is having on the manufacturing sector, and also on the government's objective of increasing the manufacturing sector's contribution to our GDP and all these things that are taking place. Eric, so you've told us excise raised 3 times within 1 year. If my memory serves me right, EABL is is the second largest contributor to tax. Is it not?
Yes, it is.
Number 2.
That
means when it comes to government, you're second largest stakeholder in terms of the people who bring in money. It's like looking at your biggest buyers of your product.
Yes.
And therefore, you have muscle when it comes to talking to government. You should be able to pick a call and call them, and they'd be say, hey, EABL are calling. They're saying we may get 1 billion shillings less this year. So let's listen to what they're saying. Is this am I actually translating what happens?
I think...
But you have muscle and you can't flex it.
So I think we have our position in the private sector to be able to raise issues. And we have. And we've presented a lot of this data. Whether it's taken into account or not is a different question. And I think it's evident that obviously it's not. But I think in terms of being progressive and being putting our minds and saying where we think tax policy should be. We've done that, and we're just hoping that with this new administration that they will actually take us more seriously and look at that data, because we are not telling them that we want them to reduce taxes now. We're telling them if you hold, you're going to get revenue growth and you're going to get volume growth, and the multiplier impact on the economy is quite significant. So they need to look at that.
You're members of Kenya Association of Manufacturers as well.
Yes.
Now, the manufacturing sector has been complaining, just like Daisy has said. When you say manufacturing is contributing 7% to GDP, it's actually a drop from what was there before. So the manufacturing sector has been talking to government and saying, these are the issues that we need to address. Make it easier for us to do business. Look at taxation. Look at county levies as well. When you're crossing a product from one to the other, it's affecting us. Look at power. If the manufacturing sector, which is also the biggest creator of jobs, is dropping and it's raising issues, and the government is sitting back and just adding more taxes, where is the disconnect? I feel are you seeing it? Because sometimes you sit back and
it's puzzling. It's
the people at the National Treasury are not like you and I. Okay, these are guys who are proper, highly trained, highly experienced economists. We keep talking about that here. Okay, the best minds.
Yes, gaffer at the Treasury.
National Treasury. Okay, other very best good minds work for the Kenya Revenue Authority, and they can see these things. So what happens?
I think, like I said earlier, I think maybe the conversations have not landed, because I think we have presented cases, and if you look at even the manufacturing manifesto by KM on and the ambition to get to 20% contribution by 2030, it's very clear and very actionable things that you can do to be able to get there. And if you come back to our sector, if you look at even our industry, beer, the beer industry, no huge investment apart from us who are quite courageous enough to put up the investment in Kisumu of 13 billion in 2018. No one else has come in because the maths don't work. If you start looking at your payback period, if you have to put an investment from a greenfield site and you expect to make money, you will make money. And those are the things we're telling government, that you need to look at where do you want to be in 2030 and what do you need to do now. And one of the things that they have to do now is look at the tax policy, because that's one of the biggest impediments for investment and making Kenya an attractive destination. If you look at even within EABL itself, the amount of investment we've put in capital expenditure in Uganda and Tanzania is quite significant, because we can see how we're going to get money back.
Yeah.
Because my shareholder has given me money and they expect us to make money for them. So if you cannot make money for them, they will not give you that investment. And I think that's what we need to look at. And if you look at even the growth in the manufacturing sector in Tanzania, it's quite significant in the last few years, because they are making policies that actually are conducive for businesses in those countries. Yeah.
Okay, Eric, now be honest with us. When you speak to these sharp minds, they must give you feedback. And probably you're the ones who are not listening to what the government is telling you. What has the government been telling you? When you say, these are the issues that need to be addressed, what do they say? They can't just be nodding and saying, tutaangalia mambo yenu.
Pretty much that's what happens. So because we were invited to make proposals every budget cycle, which we did towards the end of the back end of last year in December. So we sent a proposal on budget proposals. Once in a while we'll be called to make presentations. But the next feedback you get is when you see the finance bill.
That's it.
That's it.
Do you think you should be, looking at, usually we see a lot of this action as a result of some holes trying to be filled, whether it's in the budget making process, whether it's realizing that your fiscal year has come to an end and you've again not been able to make budget. And then there's this heavy reliance on KRA to collect as much as possible. What's the number? 1.6? 1.8?
The collection targets?
Yeah.
My friend, we are at 2, my friend.
Okay. Right? So unfortunately then, industry takes, or rather will bear the brunt of that responsibility. We already know that the heavy reliance of tax by government could be, injurious in some ways, especially when it comes to industry and individuals. The question then that they would ask these bright minds that we talk about, who are domiciled at Treasury and KRA, is that what could be an option?
I think, and my little knowledge, with studied economics in university. I think you'd start probably looking at from the expenditure side first of all. I think we need to be more careful in terms of the expenditure that we want to get into, because it's like your own budget. If you know you earn a certain salary and you have ambitions of spending more than you earn, then obviously you're going to get into a hole from the onset.
Just a bit, yeah.
So I think, and I like what we are starting to see now, austerity measures, and I hope those can be seen through, because it's by reducing expenditure that now the bridge between the revenue that you expect to collect and the expenditure becomes smaller, as opposed to having a huge expenditure ambition, but your revenues don't speak to that, because now you start to get into borrowing, and then you start making decisions that are not conducive for businesses.
Do you in the alcohol industry face what other commodity sellers face, which is an influx of cheap goods from the Commercial region, from the East African region, that do not face any import duty tax?
So I wouldn't say that's an issue. I think for us it's mainly the illicit ethanol, which is the core raw material for making spirits. That would be a problem from the region. But in terms of the beer sector, I think we are competitive enough. And like I said, the taxes here are higher anyway. So other markets, if you look at Tanzania and Uganda, the taxes are lower than us. So Tanzania's taxes are about a third of what Kenya is. So you can see already the disparities within that system. So
I've got to ask you this more direct and controversial question. I mean, it's been in the public domain. Whenever another established formal brewer tries to get into this market, they face frustration. And the word out there, the bar talk, is that the big boy in the house, EABL, is trying to fight them to get them out of the business. We saw SAB Miller coming to the country a couple of years ago, and then they left the market. Of course, you complained about your own and trying to enter into the South African market with the Tusker and the whole controversy about the Tusker and the brand and the logo and all. But they got out. The newer local plant, Keroche Industries, comes in, and everybody says, this is the big guy who is also trying to use the back door to frustrate the small boy. And yet your biggest competition, like you've told us, 50% is the illicits. Do you support the entry of other players, other formal players, so that then you can have a bigger muscle as the formal industry to push for your issues?
Competition is always welcome, and competition is healthy.
Like genuinely true. Like
genuinely true. Because I will also not be in EABL all my life. So one day I'd want to consume a brand, and as a consumer, I think the best you can get is have a wide array of products that you can be able to make a decision on which one you want to consume. And I think from our business point of view, because we have a lot of research, we've done a lot of data analytics, one of the things we do is we are very big on innovation. And if you look, every year we are launching new brands. Some work, some don't. It's because we know also the consumer is changing. The consumer is exposed to a lot of things that are happening globally. So for us to remain relevant, and for us to have been in this industry for 100 years, is because we always move with the consumer. And we think that we are able to give the consumer an offer that they'll be able to take that is better than our competition. And that's why we want to compete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at the numbers in terms of what then, you're raking in every year, would you say that, this year it's been tough? You've broken a sweat, taken a dent in profits. Has that been the case? Because one would assume that has been the case, and that's why there's,
concern.
So that's why there's concern. Or the concern is coming from, and this is part B, that the concern is coming from, okay, obviously we know that the end user or the consumer bears the brunt of any kind of, new taxes that are slapped on. It's not you going to say, okay, well, let's shoulder this for the consumer. No, it's all transferred to the bottle, right?
Yeah.
So is it that there will be less consumption? Obviously, that's less, buying. Is that where the concern is? Or actually, yes, profits have taken a dent or taken a hit. And this is where the concern now lies with this whole hoo-ha about the excise.
Yeah, so the issue, and I think I explained about the illicit market being about 50%. So the issue is not that consumption is going to go down. It's that consumers are moving from formal to informal. So that's the challenge. Actually, and we actually say our biggest competitor is the informal.
The informal, yes.
For us, is how do we recruit people from drinking those illicits
Yep.
into consuming what is formal, because that's where the biggest opportunity is for us, and that's why we would want to partner with government, because it's a win-win situation for both of us.
So would it make sense if then you looked at, the manufacturing of cheaper product?
So we've invested in Senator Keg,
Yep.
which addresses that. But the challenge also is that you have other offerings, like I talked about the spirits that are going at between 100 and 150. So even Senator cannot compete with those brands. Because first of all, the alcohol content in those brands is higher. Senator is about 4.5% ABV. So you're having a spirit that's about 40%.
Yeah.
So the consumer with 100 shillings would rather buy that than buying 3 mugs of Senator.
Yeah.
Because he'll get more value for money. And that's a challenge. So how do you ensure that you're enforcing properly to ensure that the consumer is not being able to access that product? And how do you ensure that you also make it very difficult for the supplied side of that the informal are also not producing? Because it's a demand and supply kind of balance that you need to strike. So the enforcement will help because it shrinks that informal, and then we are able to provide an offering that consumers will be able to take. Yeah.
Do you play a whistleblowing role? You know who this 50% are. Well, many of them, especially those that are bringing products into your own market. Do you play a whistleblowing role? Do you tell the government, look at
so we get a lot of intelligence because our salespeople are in the field. We have our distributors going to these bars every day, so they'll tell you the trends of what they're seeing. Around last year, at some point, we had a product that was being sold in parts of mountain, which was actually animal feed.
Yeah?
Animal feed. That is, when you mix it with yeast, it becomes a brew.
Wow.
Say what now?
Yep. So you find some of those industries, you're like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
The consumer.
Repeat.
Sorry, Eric. Human beings are consuming this
Yes.
in Kenya.
Yes.
Okay. And there are people who are producing it and packaging it for human consumption.
Yes.
All right. Sounds illegal.
It does.
Is it?
It is.
But
That's where their whistleblowing comes in.
Yeah.
So what do you do about such?
So you just inform the authorities and say, look, we are seeing this.
We
Is
have
it
very many
legit?
authorities that are supposed to. There's the anti-counterfeit authority.
Yep.
All right, and I believe it brings together even manufacturers, so you're represented in it.
Yes. So, and we raise a lot of complaints through the anti-counterfeit agency, and we have a lot of cases even in courts because a lot of brand infringement and trademark infringement. So we raise those issues with them, and we've made reports to them. We've also a number of cases also we've raised with KRA and even local authorities, because even counties have a lot to play in some of these things. Yeah.
And
There's some action, and I must say, when we have seen these multi-agency initiatives going on, we have seen a lot of activity in terms of dealing with the problem. The only issue is that they're not sustained. So they'll do what they call a rapid resource initiative, 100 days.
Yep.
A lot of seizures are done, and then they go quiet. So then the guys come back again. And also, there's a big piece also with the judiciary, because sometimes you find people who've even been taken to court, either they are let go, or even the fines are not huge enough, punitive enough to stop them from going back into doing this.
What do you think should be done better?
I think there's a bit of sensitization across all enforcement agencies in terms of what the challenges are, where the issues are, for them to be able to focus on those. I think funding is an issue, because enforcement requires funding, and I don't think government is investing enough in terms of ensuring that the enforcement is being done. And I think there's a bit of awareness that needs to be created even in the judiciary in terms of the effects of all this, in terms of what is it doing to people's health, what is it doing to businesses and the economy as well.
Is there a room for creation of a separate fund, say by the private sector, that then goes to support the enforcement? Because the private sector, what are we being told by the CEO of ACAM? How much? Is it almost 1 trillion shillings? That's basically just all of this is being lost as government revenue because of the illicits. How about the private sector then just committing a fund somewhere? and saying that we're going to support this. Of course, you can give it a sunset clause and say this one we're supporting the government for the next 5 years, but we shall make sure that the government is also increasing budgetary allocation.
Eric, we are paying taxes.
I know.
They should be directed to that.
I know, but they're not. And it's eating into our market and poisoning people.
Yeah.
So no room for that?
No, it's a conversation we can have. But I think, it's a wider discussion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Members of parliament then, because they're the ones who appropriate budgets into all these agencies and onto all these tasks. How much more engagement do you think ought to go to parliamentarians?
I think there's definitely an opportunity for constructive and dialogue with Parliament, because I think even the issues we're talking about now,
Taxation.
you might find they're not aware. And that's what we aim to do even when we are doing the engagements on the finance bill, because that's usually the opportunity when we have to look at what the proposal the government has come with. But there probably needs to be a wider conversation on tax by Parliament and looking at each of these sectors, because I think, like I've said, our sector is quietly impacted, and if we don't do something now, it's going to get worse.
Sure. There's the profit and there's the commercial side of things, but then also there's a social side of things as well. And I'm looking specifically at this 50% that we talk about of illicit brew. So there's a health hazard here, one. There's also, again, a societal issue here where we've seen the stories of people who die, go blind. I mean, a lot of things happening here. Do you think you have a role to play here as well? Because whether we want to put, the formal industry on a pedestal here, we can't run away from the linkages that there are then between that and the illicit industry as well. Talking about the danger that it poses to Kenyans' lives who consume these brews or whatever it is that they are that are dangerous to health. Do you think you have a role to play?
Yes, we do. And I think there's some programs that we've been running as well in terms of, first of all, we look at, if you look at the problem of illicit, people get into illicit not because it's the best option, but it's probably the only option to make money. So one of the things that we've tried to do is, how do we identify these people, and most of them usually are actually women. How do you train them to do something else? Because they are doing it because they're looking for a source of livelihood. How do you recruit them to do something else? So one of the things that we've done is some of them recruit them to run the senator bars, because you're already in the alcohol trade, you know your customers. How do we help you set up formally? And then you're selling something that is illegitimate. The other one is that we offer Learning for Life program, which is a program where we are trying to give skills to young people to be able to go ahead and start their own business, like entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial skills, because we feel that it's an opportunity to create economic empowerment. And that also removes them from the vice of consuming or producing illicit. So definitely there's a role. Maybe it's not at the scale that we want it to be, but I think that's one of the areas that we feel that as a business we can be able to provide a solution.
I actually thought about that, co-opting them, and I thought that it was too far-fetched, like co-opting the, illicit brewers. But these guys, some of them are quite creative. I mean, some of their creations become dangerous, but they're local alchemists. Like some of them, would you incorporate them now into your R&D departments? Because also what they're doing, some of these people have been brewing for a really long time and are responding even to the local tastes of the people, in what they're producing. Does that happen?
So I wouldn't say that we recruit them to be to be brewers on our side, but I think the main issue here is that it's an outlet. They are able to sell. So when we set up these senator bars, we give them those opportunities. We even pay, in some instances, we even paid licenses for them, because we want you to come formal. And we want you to have a decent, you don't want every day there's a chief coming knocking on your door.
That's a great idea.
So how do we ensure that we support? And we've worked with county governments, like the county government of Kisumu, in terms of how do we even have reduced licenses for these people, so that they are able to transition and they have decent working conditions and they can be able to be productive in the economy.
Does EABL have a foundation?
Yes, we do have a foundation.
Okay.
There was a push to have these traditional brews formally recognized and registered. Then so that we can move into where Muratina is actually a product and there is a standard of producing Muratina and it can be packaged, it can be sold
Like
properly.
Waraji out of Uganda,
Like the way they do with Waraji. That would be something else, instead of just always condemning them. But you guys are making busa, and Muzungu came and told us busa is not a good thing. Busa has been a good thing for years.
There are actually some standards. I think Changa has a standard. The only challenge is the setup, because of all these additional issues and costs that you have to bring in.
There's no incentive.
There's no incentive for someone to do it. And actually, at some point, we had a proposal, because we're saying some of these traditional brews actually they play a role in our culture. If you have a wedding and there is Muratina and all these things, it's cultural. And we're saying the way there's a way you can have it licensed within that local community, because who is licensed to produce and for what purpose. It's not supposed to be a place where you're selling the product. But if Eric has an initiation ceremony at his place, we know that there's so and so who can brew this stuff and it will be delivered to this place for that particular ceremony, but not for commercial.
But that is containing them. Why not commercial?
Because Eric becomes competition to EABL when he blows up.
No, then this guy has to pay tax, which he'll be like, okay, I don't want to pay tax. So it becomes
back into the
den.
It's about incentivizing them so that then we can also, just like you said, competition is good. It may also actually make you, as you continually innovate, start giving us brats.
Yeah.
What?
Muratina.
Eric Kiniti, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for raising these conversations. We've had the chairman of the Finance Committee of the National Assembly here, the MP for Molo, and we're going to have him again. And now that we have these insights, we'll invite him, and we can also maybe invite you with him as you publicly lobby for these particular issues.
I would look forward to that.
Yeah. Eric Kiniti is a Group Corporate Relations Director at EABL. He's been here with us this morning talking about excise stamp duty, and what is happening is the increases in excise stamp and what they're doing to the industry, and not just that, what they're doing to consumers of alcoholic drinks in this country, pushing them more and more into the dangerous and poisonous zone, which then affects our productivity as a nation, and what that is doing to the manufacturing sector, losing revenues and losing growth in that as well. Asante sana for joining us.